Today's lesson is National Foods with Surprising Origins. Hi everybody, my name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about iconic dishes from various countries that didn't actually come from those countries. We mentioned a couple of examples last time. We talked about Swedish meatballs, which actually have their origin in Turkey. And then we also talked about croissants, the iconic French food, which actually came from kipfels, which are originally from Austria.
That's right. So we looked at two very popular foods, and today we're going to look at another popular dish, a British dish, or a dish that we normally associate with Britain, very representative of Britain, fish and chips. But as we will find out, the British didn't actually invent this dish.
They did not, and that is an iconic dish in the UK. If you ever go there, of course, one of the first things you want to try is fish and chips, along with scones and meat pies or whatever. But we will talk about fish and chips to open up our lesson. So let's hear about fish and chips right now.
Fish and chips. Fish and chips is a dish we identify with the UK, but this classic British meal traces its origins to multiple different countries. The battered fish was the first part to arrive, having been brought to England in the 1500s by Portuguese Jewish refugees fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. The new style of fish was an immediate hit in England, where it became a popular street food. The chips were most likely brought over by French or Belgian immigrants over a century later. In the 1860s, the first fish and chip shops opened, and the rest is history.
So we're going to start by talking about fish and chips. Fish and chips is a dish we identify with the UK, but this classic British meal traces its origins to multiple different countries. So first of all, fish and chips is a dish we identify with the UK. To identify with means to consider something to be connected with something else. So we consider fish and chips to be connected to the UK. So we identify this dish with the UK. I could also say as an example sentence, many people identify Elon Musk with space technology. We all know that Elon Musk has a company called SpaceX that does space exploration. As a result, Elon Musk is often identified with, or we identify him with, space technology.
Or Bugs Bunny is identified with Warner Brothers cartoons, etc., if you're a fan of that. And again, we identify fish and chips with the UK. But this classic British meal traces its origins to multiple different countries. So here we've got the phrase to trace its origin to, which means that's where it came from. You do have to do some research and you need to come to some conclusions as to where fish and chips came from. So yes, this meal traces its origins to different countries, and we're describing them as multiple different countries. Multiple means many. To me, maybe 3 or 4 or more. So yes, it comes from many different places.
That's right. Now, the battered fish was the first part to arrive, having been brought to England in the 1500s by Portuguese Jewish refugees fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. So we are describing the fish part of fish and chips as battered fish. So battered here means covered in a mixture of milk, egg, and flour, which is the batter that coats the fish before the fish is put in oil to deep fry. So that's what battered means. So the battered fish came first. It came before the chips to the UK. And this battered fish, this dish was brought to England in the 1500s by Portuguese Jewish refugees. So these Jewish people, they were Portuguese, but they were of the Jewish religion. They were refugees because they were trying to escape from Portugal because of the Spanish Inquisition. So the Spanish Inquisition is something when the Catholic Church was being really harsh on certain people who did things or said things or thought things that were against the Catholic Church. So these people would be punished. And the Jewish people, of course, did not think in the same ways as Catholic people. And to escape punishment by the Catholic Church, they decided to escape to England and they brought battered fish with them. Now, the new style of fish was an immediate hit in England where it became a popular street food. So this new style of fish, new way of preparing fish, was a hit. To be a hit means to be very popular. It means that the fish had immediate success. And immediate just means that it happened right away without any delay. It didn't take some time for battered fish to become popular. Right away it became popular. And it was sold in the streets. So the Jewish refugees probably didn't have enough money to set up their own shops, their own stores. And the only way for them to be able to sell the fish was in the streets. Maybe they had carts, they had stands so that people could pass by and buy some battered fish.
Right, so people found out about it and they told their friends and said, hey, you got to try this new kind of food. It's fish that's deep fried in oil and the fish is battered. So, of course, it was popular rather quickly and it was sold from street vendors, just like food is sold here oftentimes in Taiwan. And the chips, which means the pieces of potato that are deep fried as well. The chips were most likely brought over by French or Belgian immigrants over a century later. So we've got people in France and in Belgium who decided to immigrate to the UK 100 years later, and they brought their own recipes with them. They brought the chips, which are very similar to French fries in the United States, although I think the chips in England are bigger, cut in larger pieces, and probably fried in a different sort of oil with different seasonings and stuff like that. So they're probably not the same thing, but in any case, these chips or deep-fried potatoes were brought over by French people and Belgian people who were immigrating to the UK about 100 years later. So an immigrant, of course, is somebody who moves from one country to another and they stay there and they become new citizens there.
That's right. So we can also say that America, the United States, is made up of immigrants because throughout the history of the United States, there had been waves of people, of immigrants coming from different countries. So in the late 18th century, there were a lot of Italian immigrants also who came in the early 20th century. Before that, earlier on, you had German immigrants, you had Swedish immigrants. So America is a country of predominantly immigrants.
Indeed, and in the 1860s, the first fish and chip shops opened, and the rest is history. So basically, when we say the rest is history, that means we don't need to say anything else. It's very obvious what happened after that. Fish and chips became popular in the 1860s, and they've been popular ever since. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion about the iconic fish and chips dish in the UK. Now let's talk about ice cream. And yeah, you might be thinking Italy when you think of ice cream because of gelato, but I guess ice cream has a surprising origin, which we'll find out about now.
Ice cream. Italy is so famous for its gelato that you could be forgiven for assuming that ice cream was invented there. But rumor has it that this creamy dessert originated in one of the last countries you might associate with it, Mongolia. It's said that Mongolian horsemen created ice cream by accident while they were traveling on horseback and carrying yak milk in containers. Apparently, the freezing temperatures, combined with the constant stirring of the milk, produced the frozen treat. Whatever the case, we should count ourselves lucky that these foods have made their way onto the global table.
大家好，第二部分我们看到动词 assume 指认为或是假定。例如 Chad assumes that everyone saw the movie. Chad 认为大家都看过那部电影。另外 assume 也有接下职位或是担起角色的意思，像是 Max assumed the responsibilities in the home after his father became ill. Max 在父亲病后承接下家里的责任。也可以说 Sarah assumed the role of parent for her younger siblings while her mother was in the hospital. Sarah 在她妈妈住院期间担起家长的角色，照顾弟妹。接着我们看到动词 originate， 指发源或是来自，像是 The river by our cabin originates from up in the mountains. 我们小屋旁的那条河源头来自那山上。或是 Researchers are trying to find out where the virus originates from. 研究人员正试图找出这个病毒是源自哪里。另外补充这个字的名词 origin, O-R-I-G-I-N, origin, 意思是起源或是由来。我们可以说 The tour guide explained the origin of the building to us. 导游向我们解释这座建筑物的起源。也可以说Our teacher told us about the origins of paper today. 我们的老师今天告诉我们有关纸的起源。最后我们看到单字 container， 这个字是名词，指容器。例如 These containers are designed to hold poisonous substances. 这些容器是设计用来盛装有毒物质的。或是 That container of peanut butter is almost empty. 那个装花生酱的容器几乎空了。另外补充 container 的动词 contain, C-O-N-T-A-I-N, contain, 指包含或是容纳。像是 That box contains all of my family's old photos. 那个盒子装有我家人所有的旧照片。也可以说 Craig gave Bethany a box that contained a beautiful ring. Craig 给 Bethany 一个盒子，里面装有一枚漂亮的戒指。
So now we're going to look at ice cream. Now, Italy is so famous for its gelato that you could be forgiven for assuming that ice cream was invented there. So for a lot of people, whenever they think of ice cream, they will think of gelato, which is something that you will find a lot of in Italy. And if that's how you think, well, you will be forgiven for assuming that ice cream was invented in Italy. When you assume something, you believe it to be true, even though you have no proof or no facts to back you up. So I could say, for instance, to someone, well, I assume it's raining outside because you're all wet. You've just arrived and you're all wet. You're covered in water, so I assume that it's raining outside.
Exactly. So you might assume that ice cream came from Italy because we all know about gelato. And Helen, you know about Italy. And is gelato the same thing as ice cream?
Gelato is not exactly the same thing as ice cream. I don't know technically what the difference is, but I know that taste-wise, gelato is less creamy than ice cream, and I think it melts more easily.
Okay, good enough. So gelato, of course, is available here in Taiwan, as is ice cream. But again, if somebody asks you, hey, where does ice cream come from? Well, you would be forgiven if you say Italy, because gelato comes from there, and so you might think ice cream was invented in Italy as well. But rumor has it that this creamy dessert originated in one of the last countries you might associate with it, Mongolia. Yes, who would have guessed? I never would have guessed that ice cream came from Mongolia, but this is according to rumor. Okay, we don't know for sure because it happened a long time ago, but rumor has it, some people believe that this creamy dessert originated from a country you would least expect, Mongolia. So here we've got the phrase to associate something with something else. We often associate Italy with spaghetti or other kinds of pasta because Italy has lots of different kinds of pasta, even though it's debatable that pasta came from Italy. It probably came from China. But in any case here, this is quite a surprise. We would least expect ice cream to come from Mongolia. Mongolia is not a big country with a big desert.
That's right. And it also has a lot of yaks. So according to rumors, or it is said, that Mongolian horsemen created ice cream by accident when they were traveling on horseback and carrying yak milk in containers. So we know that Mongolians in the past traveled a lot and they covered great distances on horseback, and that they're excellent horsemen. So they went on horseback very often, and sometimes they would carry yak milk. Yak is the type of animal that looks like a cow basically, but it's hairier, has a lot of fur, hair on its body, and it has really huge horns. And Mongolians drank yak milk and they would carry it on the horse's back.
Exactly. So they carried the yak milk in containers. A container is something that contains something. That's the verb to contain. It has this thing inside of it. So yes, of course, you need to carry milk in containers. Otherwise, it's going to spill all over the place. And apparently, the freezing temperatures combined with the constant stirring of the milk produced the frozen treat. So here, apparently, comes from the word apparent, which describes something that is sort of true, or it's quite obvious when you look at it. So apparently, of course, it seems to be the case that these freezing temperatures caused the milk to freeze, and then the horsemen had to constantly stir the milk. If you stir, of course, you keep mixing something, especially if it's milk and it's getting cold. You want to keep stirring it so it doesn't freeze into ice. So they had to constantly stir it, and that actually produced ice cream. It produced the frozen treat.
That's right. So these horsemen kept yak milk in containers. So we might think of a container in this context as something that would contain a liquid, but actually the noun container can mean any type of object that contains something. So it could be a box, it could be a bottle, it could be a bowl. So anything that holds something else can be considered a container. And as for the word apparently, that's a word that you would use before you say something else if what you're going to say is based on what you've heard, based on rumor, rather than what you know to be true. So you could say something like, apparently Doug and Sally are getting a divorce, which means you don't really know if they are getting a divorce, but it's based on what you've heard, based on rumors.
You could also say, it seems the freezing temperatures combined with constant stirring of the milk produced the frozen treat that we all know and love as ice cream. Whatever the case, we should count ourselves lucky that these foods have made their way onto the global table. So here we're wrapping things up. Whatever the case, however these foods came to be, no matter where they come from, we should consider ourselves lucky. So here we have the phrase to count yourself lucky, which means to consider yourself lucky. You could say to count yourself unfortunate if you've lost your job, for example. Consider yourself out of luck if you've been fired from your job. But we need to count ourselves lucky. We need to remember that we're lucky because these foods have made their way onto the global table. They have found their way onto our tables, and we can enjoy them no matter where they came from.
Right, and here we have the phrase made their way. When you make your way, or when something makes its way to another place, it just moves there or it arrives there eventually. I could say something like, people made their way to the buffet table as soon as the restaurant opened.
Interesting. Okay, so I, of course, have a question for all of you. What popular food in Taiwan is Taiwan known for, but it actually did not come from here? That'd be an interesting question for all of you, and maybe you can come up with some interesting answers. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. It's time now to turn things over to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分介绍了炸鱼薯条的起源，那裹上面糊的鱼肉是先到来的部分，由葡萄牙裔犹太难民带到英国。那这种新风格的鱼肉立刻在英国蔚为风潮。好，那文中它是用到 an immediate hit， 这个 hit 在这边是名词，用来指红极一时的事物。那么 immediate 则是形容立即的。这边我们就来拆解一下 immediate 它的字首字跟字尾。 好，先看到它的字首 I am 是来自 IN， 因为 IN 它碰到字母 B、M 或者是 P， 则会拼作 I am。那这个字首是表达无。好，再来看到字根 MEDI， 它表示中途、中间。形容词字尾 ATE 则是表达状态的。我们就可以借由没有中间的过程，中途都没有停留那种状态，去联想到 immediate， 它是表达立即的、立刻的或是直接的。好，那说到 ATE 这个字尾，它其实是很常见的字尾哦。它除了可以用来当形容词字尾，也可以当动词字尾或者是名词字尾。那我们就简单介绍一下。好，首先第一种 ATE 当形容词字尾的时候呢，它表示具有某种特质或状态的，也可以表达拥有什么什么的。像是 fortunate 这个字呢，它就是由 fortune 运气、机会，再加上 ATE 表示拥有，合在一起 fortunate 就是表达幸运的。好，第二个用法就是 ATE 它当动词字尾的时候呢，它带有那种使点点点或者是施加点点点的那种意思。像 vaccinate 它就是由 vaccine 疫苗再加上动词字尾 ATE 表示施加，你去想施加疫苗，这样就很容易理解 vaccinate 就表示给什么什么接种疫苗。好，那么第三个要介绍用法就是 ATE 它当名词字尾的话，主要有两种意思，一个是用来指说从事某个行动或执行某个权利的人或群体，那么另外一个就是指说具备某职务或阶级的一群人。好，我们来看到这个 electorate 这个字当中呢，它的前面 ELECTOR elector 可以表达选举人，有选举权的人，后面加上 ATE 表示点点点的人，把它结合在一起 electorate 则是表达全体选民，它就是个集合名词咯。接着我们看到课文第二部分，它提到说传闻冰淇淋是起源于你最不会把它们联想在一起的其中一个国家，那就是蒙古。好，这边要帮同学们整理一下 associate A with B 的用法。associate 或者是念作 associate， 它当动词可以表达联想或是使什么有关联。好，那我们除了用 associate A with B， 你也可以用被动语态 A be associated with B 去表达出两种常见的语义。像第一种是课文的用法，去表达说将 A 和 B 联想在一起。例如Many people associate summer with the beach. 许多人会把夏天跟海滩联想在一起。好，那第二个常见的语义就是表达使 A 和 B 有关联。例如 These symptoms are associated with anxiety. 这些症状与焦虑症有关联。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Multiple.Leroy used information from multiple sources to write his essay. Immediate. The medicine provided Roberta with immediate relief from her headache. Immigrant. Esperanza's parents are immigrants, but she is a U.S. citizen. Assume. I assumed that you would be a little late today because of the rain. Container. Eve took the container out of the fridge, removed its lid, and placed it in the microwave. Apparently.He made a fortune selling trading cards on the internet. Stir. Can you stir the soup while I make the garlic bread?
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today, and the question is, which of these foods were you most surprised to learn the origin of, and why?
I was particularly surprised to learn that Swedish meatballs were actually made in Turkey because I had always thought that Swedish meatballs were an invention of IKEA.
Well, I couldn't believe that ice cream came from Mongolia since I had always thought that ice cream probably came from some northern European country because I always think of dairy food with, say, France or with Germany or something like that with all their cheese and milk and buttermilk. But in any case here, yeah, that was kind of difficult for me to believe that ice cream actually came from Mongolia. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.